She traded in the only car she ever owned, a beat-up Civic with a cracked windshield and a trunk full of tools for a mechanic shop no one wanted. The roof sagged. The walls leaned. The seller handed her the keys like it was a curse. But 3 weeks later, when she pried up a section of the basement floor, what she uncovered forced her to call the police and revealed a truth hidden since the 1950s. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from. And if stories like this move you, hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow's episode is even more unbelievable than this one. The day Marley Diaz gave up her car for the crumbling auto shop, it was raining so hard she couldn't tell if her shirt was soaked with water or regret. The Civic she handed over wasn't just a ride, it had been her escape, her shelter, her mobile toolbox through 5 years of odd jobs and backroad breakdowns. It was the car her late grandfather taught her to drive in, the one she'd rebuilt twice, and the only thing she could honestly say was hers. But something about the listing "auto shop for trade" as is, no warranty, bring your own luck, pulled at her in a way she couldn't explain. It felt like a dare, or maybe a whisper. The man who made the trade didn't ask questions. He was older, heavy-set, with sun-scorched skin and hands that trembled even when he was still. He barely looked at her car, just nodded once and handed her a manila envelope with the deed and a single key inside. "I'd seal off the basement if I were you," he muttered. "Damp down there, old bones." He didn't smile, just turned, got in the Civic, and drove off like he was late for forgetting something. The shop stood on the edge of a forgotten stretch of Route 9, one of those roads that used to matter. The sign was half fallen, the windows smeared with years of dust, and the front door leaned just enough to make you question its hinges. Inside, it smelled like rust, wet cardboard, and a faint trail of gasoline that clung to the walls. There were still tools left behind, scattered across dented steel workbenches, some rusted, some pristine, all untouched like someone had just walked out mid-repair and never returned. Marley stood in the center of it all, letting the storm echo through the cracked skylight. It wasn't much, but for the first time in months, she felt still. She'd been running for a long time from bills, from grief, from a career that stalled before it started. But here, in this crooked box of a building, something held her in place, like the walls were listening. She spent the first few nights cleaning, scraping moss from corners, tossing out old tarps, airing out the mildew from the office. She slept in a hammock rigged between 2 steel posts and showered with a garden hose connected to a water heater that only worked on Thursdays. She didn't mind. Hard work made sense to her. It always had. But it was on the 3rd night, while rearranging a bookshelf bolted strangely to the wall, that she noticed something odd. Behind it, a draft, cold and rhythmic, like breath. She leaned in, pressed her ear to the wall, and paused. It wasn't wind, it wasn't plumbing, it was something deeper. Something was waiting down there. Marley didn't sleep that night. She lay in the hammock with her flashlight clutched against her chest like a cross, eyes wide, ears tuned to every creak and groan in the walls. She told herself the noise was old pipes, or maybe rodents. But a part of her she couldn't ignore the same part that said, trade the car, knew it wasn't anything that simple. By sunrise, she had made up her mind. If there was something beneath her, she needed to see it. She moved the bookshelf with a crowbar and her full body weight. Behind it was drywall patched with a different texture, newer, sloppier, like someone sealed it in a hurry. She dug through her tools and found a sledgehammer left by whoever last worked in the shop. The first swing echoed like a gunshot. The second broke through. Behind the wall was a narrow concrete staircase, steep and choked with cobwebs, leading down into silence. Her boots hit the first step, and dust rose like memory. The air got colder, thicker. Marley clicked on her flashlight and took one cautious step at a time, the beam bouncing off damp stone walls. It wasn't a basement. It was a bunker. Reinforced concrete, corrugated steel ceiling, a heavy blast door, cracked open 2 inches like it had been waiting. Inside, the room was larger than she expected, maybe 20 feet wide, with shelves along every wall metal, rusted, and stacked with boxes. Some were labeled with dates, others with names. One just said, "Do not destroy." But what stopped her wasn't the files or the shelves. It was the floor. A section of it was different. Wood slats instead of concrete. And it was humming. Not loud, not mechanical, but something she felt through her boots, a subtle vibration that matched the beat of her heart. She crouched, placed her palm flat against the boards, and closed her eyes. "Feel that?" a voice whispered in her memory. It was her father's voice, low and patient, the way he used to speak when teaching her how to diagnose a dead engine by sound alone. "A machine always talks, kid. You just have to learn its language." She opened her eyes. That hum wasn't power. It wasn't a machine. It was something else entirely, and it didn't want to be forgotten. The floorboards came up easier than she thought. Beneath them, dirt, loose, damp, freshly stirred. And at the center, a small metal handle, half buried, waiting to be pulled. She didn't touch it. Not yet. Instead, Marley stood, dusted off her jeans, and walked back up the stairs. She needed air, and coffee, and maybe a moment to convince herself she wasn't about to dig up a grave. But she already knew whatever was down there. It hadn't been forgotten. It had been hidden, and now it was hers to uncover. Marley didn't tell anyone about what she found. Not the staircase, not the bunker, not the strange hum beneath the boards. She tried to act normal, sweeping the shop, fixing the power to the garage door, running a pressure test on the old compressor, but everything felt different now. Every tool she picked up felt heavier. Every corner she glanced toward carried the weight of a secret pressing upward from below. The next morning, she returned to the basement bunker with gloves, a flashlight, and a notebook she'd used in trade school to jot down part numbers. The steel door groaned louder this time, like it recognized her. She stepped inside, this time scanning the shelves instead of the floor. The boxes weren't full of tools or spare parts. They held files old, yellowed, meticulously labeled. Some were stamped with red ink that had faded to pink. City of Lindale, Department of Infrastructure. Others bore stranger tags. Experimental Housing Unit 7C, Confidential Eyes Only. She tugged open a drawer in a rusted cabinet and pulled out a rolled document blueprints. She uncurled it on the floor beneath the single hanging bulb, careful not to rip the brittle edges. It wasn't for the shop above. It was for something underground. Multiple levels, reinforced rooms, a water filtration system, what looked like medical diagrams, sublevel, 2 observation wing. She blinked. Was this place once government-owned? Some kind of Cold War shelter? A lab? Her fingers trembled as she flipped to the second page, another schematic, hand-labeled in shaky cursive. Section 4. Behavioral Control Testing Units. Marley leaned back against the wall, her breath catching in her throat. This wasn't just a basement. It was a hidden facility, and it had been erased from public memory. Her thoughts turned to the man who gave her the deed, his trembling hands. The way he looked at the shop like it was something he'd escaped, not sold. "I'd seal off the basement if I were you," he'd said. She looked around the room again. Dust covered everything. But the blueprint had no dust, no mildew. It had been handled recently. Someone else had been down here, maybe not long before her. Her foot nudged a box on the floor beneath the blueprint cabinet. It clinked. Not paper's metal. Inside, she found dozens of small brass rings, each etched with a number. Some still had strands of string attached, like they had once been worn as ID tags. The numbers weren't sequential, but one caught her eye. 17. She didn't know why, but the sight of that tag chilled her more than anything else. She dropped the lid shut and backed away from the box. When she climbed back upstairs, she noticed something else. The bookshelf that had hidden the basement door wasn't part of the original building. Its back wasn't wood. It was drywall, nailed on from the inside. Somebody had gone through a lot of trouble to cover that bunker, but not to destroy it, to protect it, or to protect the world from what it held. That night, Marley woke up gasping. Not from a dream, at least, Not one she remembered, but with the distinct feeling that something had moved beneath her hammock. She swung her legs down, heart racing, listening. Nothing. Just the creak of old beams and the faint hum of the highway in the distance. But the air smelled different. Colder, sharper, like metal and wet stone. She slid on her boots and walked to the edge of the trapdoor she'd left open in the shop floor. The flashlight beam cut through the dust again as she descended into the bunker, her breath fogging in the colder air below. She paused, just above the last step. The hatch in the dirt had been disturbed. Not a lot, just enough. The dirt she'd left smoothed over had been shifted. The handle, once half buried, now stood fully exposed, and beside it, 2 faint footprints. Not hers. Marley swallowed hard. Her fingers itched to reach for her socket wrench, like it could protect her from whatever was happening. But instead, she knelt and pressed her palm flat to the dirt. The humming was stronger now. Louder, but not in sound, in sensation. It pulsed through her arm, into her chest, like an engine cranking beneath her skin. Something down there was active. She stood and backed away slowly, scanning the walls again. That's when she noticed one of the steel shelves had shifted. Or maybe it had been built differently from the start. She ran her hand along its edge, and sure enough, there was a gap behind it. Not a wall, but a passage. Narrow, maybe 3 feet wide, lined with concrete and descending into even deeper darkness. She hesitated. Every instinct screamed at her to go back upstairs, to call someone, to not be the girl who follows every horror story mistake. But Marley had never been the type to leave things half-finished. Especially when they were broken. Especially when they were hidden. She wedged herself sideways into the gap, the walls scraping her jacket as she slid downward. The smell was worse here, mold, rot, something electric. The passage opened into a chamber, lined with reinforced glass on one side, and rusted cages on the other. Inside, the cages were remains. Animal, she hoped. But the bones were too long, too human, yet distorted. She turned back toward the glass. Beyond it, a viewing room. A chair bolted to the floor, with wrist straps still intact. And across from the chair, etched into the wall with something jagged. They said it was for good. Marley staggered back, bumping into the bars. Her flashlight flickered, then steadied. The silence down here was suffocating, but in the moment before she turned to leave, something cut through it. A breath. Not hers. From somewhere deeper in the dark. Something exhaled, and it wasn't alone. Marley emerged from the passage shaking, her clothes damp with sweat and dust. She slammed the metal shelf back into place, sealing off the tunnel behind her like she could trap whatever was breathing in the dark. Then she climbed the stairs 2 at a time, flicked the breaker off to kill the basement lights, and sat on the garage floor with her back to the wall. Her hands were trembling, the flashlight still clutched in a death grip. She wasn't prone to panic. She'd rebuilt entire engines with fire ants crawling up her legs and once welded an axle in a thunderstorm. But this was different. She wasn't just uncovering history. She was waking something up. The next morning, the sun cut through the high windows and made the shop look almost peaceful. Almost normal. She convinced herself she'd imagined the breath. That it was the echo of her own fear, bouncing through narrow corridors. Maybe there was a vent. Or maybe the pipes still held air pockets. Maybe. She spent the morning in the office, trying to distract herself by sorting through the paperwork the previous owner had left behind. Utility bills, city inspections, a faded calendar from 1997, with only one day circled in red, June 14. No note, no context. Just a red circle around a Tuesday. Her hand brushed the bottom drawer of the old metal desk. It didn't open easily, but when it did, it revealed a cloth roll tied shut with twine. She unwrapped it slowly. Inside was a set of surgical tools, not automotive. Surgical, scalpels, forceps, something that looked like a bone saw. The handle stained darker than the others. Each piece had been cleaned, but not well. They weren't rusted. They were used. She placed them on the desk one by one, her fingers numb. Each had initials etched near the grip. L.H. Beneath the tools, a faded photograph. A man in a lab coat, standing next to what looked like a restraint chair, the chair she'd seen behind the glass. His face was thin, unreadable. And in pen, across the back of the photo, Dr. Lewis Halpern, Facility Director, 1957. Marley stared at the name. L.H. She turned back toward the shop floor, suddenly noticing something she hadn't seen before. On the far wall, above the tool rack, was a metal vent, barely noticeable, painted over and sealed. She stood on a stool and unscrewed the faceplate. Inside, a plastic bag. She pulled it out, opened it, and found 3 items: a roll of undeveloped film, a worn cassette tape, and a small brass key labeled Cabinet C. She didn't own a darkroom. She didn't have a tape player. But the key she recognized the matching cabinet in the bunker. She hadn't opened it yet. It was padlocked when she first explored. Now it wasn't. Her fingers closed around the key. This shop didn't need a renovation. It needed an exorcism. The key slid into Cabinet C like it had been waiting. The lock clicked once, softly, and Marley paused before opening it. She braced herself for the worst: bones, evidence bags, something that would force her to stop pretending this was just some weird old bunker. But what was inside was, at first glance, benign, personal even. A small cardboard box, a photo album, a velvet ring box with no name. She pulled them out one by one and set them on the bunker floor under the weak light. The album was old, leather-bound, brittle at the spine. She opened it carefully. Inside were dozens of black and white photos, some creased, others preserved like they'd never seen air. Most were of people, patients, subjects. Each had a number written in ink beneath it. No names, just numbers. Some were smiling, others sedated, a few clearly restrained. Then she flipped to the last page. A woman, mid-20s, standing in front of the shop as it once was, pristine and new. Her hand rested on a car hood, her smile small but real. No number under this one, just a date. June 14, 1957. The same date circled on the calendar. Marley felt a jolt crawl up her spine. She checked the back of the photo. Nothing. But the corners were bent, like it had been carried often, maybe kept in someone's pocket. She set it beside the album and opened the velvet ring box. Inside was a simple gold ring, thin, unadorned. But inside the band was an engraving. To A. Yours L. No last names, no dates, just an initial and a promise. Marley exhaled slowly. Whatever this place had been, it wasn't just a facility. Someone had lived here, loved here, maybe lost everything here. She returned to the floor hatch, kneeling beside it again. This time, she didn't hesitate. She wrapped her fingers around the metal handle and pulled. The hatch groaned and lifted with a shiver of dust and damp earth. A wooden ladder descended into blackness. No lights, no handrails, just more silence. She dropped a glow stick down to test the depth. It hit dirt about 12 feet below, illuminating the floor in a dim green glow. She climbed down slowly, her boots pressing into rungs that creaked like ribs. The chamber below was circular, no larger than a prison cell. One bench built into the wall, a small drain in the center. And on the far side, scrawled in charcoal, "Tell her I said yes." Marley's breath caught. The voice in her head said it again. To A. Yours, L. This place had been more than clinical. It had held secrets of the heart, of commitment, maybe even of sacrifice. She turned and shone her light back toward the ladder, but her beam caught something new. A box tucked into the curve of the wall. A cigar box, just like the one that held Caleb's story, in that Mustang all those states away. Inside, a reel of 8mm film, a cracked name badge, and a note, written in hurried script. Don't let them erase this. Marley sat on the concrete floor of the lower chamber, the cigar box open beside her, its contents splayed out like confessions. The note in her lap trembled, not because her hands were shaking, but because something about the words felt alive. Don't let them erase this. It wasn't a request. It was a plea. Maybe a final one. She carried the box back up the ladder, with slow, deliberate steps. Each rung felt heavier, like the weight of the past was climbing with her. Back in the bunker, she examined the reel. It had no label, just a single fingerprint smudged on the edge. The badge was cracked down the middle, but the name was still legible. Angela Wren, clinical coordinator. And so, Marley remembered the woman in the photo. Same eyes, same guarded smile. She opened her notebook and wrote the name in all caps. She didn't know why, but it felt like the first real answer in a sea of questions. She spent the rest of the day researching. The internet had very little on Angela Wren. A single mention in an archived Lyndale newspaper from 1956, listed as part of a local science initiative. Nothing more. No obituary, no retirement announcement, just gone. The facility, too, had been wiped clean. No records, no permits. The land records only listed previous structure, purpose unknown, with a demolition order signed, but never executed. It was as if the town had tried to forget the whole building ever existed. By nightfall, Marley had made her decision. She called the police. Not 911. Not yet. Just the local station. A man answered. Older voice. She explained what she found. An undisclosed bunker beneath her property. Sealed rooms. Evidence of something potentially criminal. There was a long pause. Then, "What's the address?" she told him. Another pause. "I'm going to send someone out," he said. "Don't touch anything else." The line clicked dead. An hour later, a cruiser pulled up outside. No sirens, just headlights sweeping across the cracked parking lot. A single officer stepped out, gray hair, lean build, badge hanging heavy on his belt. "Marley Diaz?" he asked. She nodded. He didn't smile, just gestured to the building. "Show me." They walked in silence, down the stairs, into the bunker. She pointed out everything, the documents, the cabinet, the hidden room. She kept waiting for him to stop her, to ask a question, to radio in, but he didn't. When they reached the lowest chamber, he stood still for a long time. Then, finally, he spoke. "I've heard rumors about this place my whole life," he said. "My grandfather used to talk about a woman who disappeared in 57, said she worked here, said she knew something she shouldn't." He looked at the note in Marley's hand. His voice dropped. "You just stepped into something real old, and real buried." Then he took out his phone, snapped one photo of the hatch, and said, "I need to make a call." The officer, whose name she learned was Sheriff Eli McGraw, paced in silence as he made his call. He kept his voice low, turned slightly away from her, but Marley caught fragments. "She found the Wren room." No, she hasn't seen the tapes yet." "Yeah, that kind of clearance." He hung up, turned back toward her, and for the first time, looked human. Not just law enforcement. Tired, cautious. "You didn't see this," he said. "Not officially. Not yet." Marley crossed her arms. "I'm not about to lie about what I found." He nodded slowly, like he expected that. "I'm not asking you to, but I am asking you to be careful. You might think this is just old paper and dirt, but whatever happened down here, it was covered up for a reason." She gestured toward the files. "You know what this place was?" "I know what people say it was," he sighed. "A research site, behavioral experiments, maybe something more. After the Cold War, some of those private operations went off. Books. Black budget stuff. If you wanted to test something you weren't proud of, you didn't do it in D.C. You did it here, somewhere small, quiet, forgotten." Marley stared at the rusted walls, the restraint chair, the scrawled messages. "You think people died here?" He didn't answer. Instead, he walked to the corner where the cages had been. He bent down, brushed aside a pile of dust, and uncovered a floor grate. He pried it open with his pocket knife. A small tunnel, no wider than a man's shoulders, stretched into the darkness. It wasn't on the blueprints. They didn't just keep people here. he said. They moved them, or moved things. Marley's voice was barely a whisper. Where does it go? I don't know. But it doesn't end under your shop. He stood, wiped his hands on his jeans. Whatever this place was, it was part of something bigger. They both stood in silence for a while. Then he said something that stuck with her. You know, sometimes we think when we dig up the past, we're rescuing the truth. But some truths weren't buried. They were entombed. Before leaving, he gave her his number, not the station's, and told her to call only if something changed. Then he stepped into the night and drove off, without turning on his lights. Marley locked the shop behind him, then sat in the office with the note from Angela Wren still in her hand. Don't let them erase this. She didn't know what this truly was yet, but she was starting to believe someone died trying to tell her. The next morning, Marley opened the shop like it was any other Tuesday. The fluorescent lights buzzed, the air compressor kicked on with its usual sputter, and the scent of old oil lingered like cologne. She tried to pretend everything was normal, that she hadn't just uncovered a secret bunker, that a sheriff hadn't whispered about black-budget programs in her basement. But around 10 a.m., the past walked in wearing a navy coat and a badge that didn't belong to this town. The man introduced himself as Agent Crawley. He didn't flash a government ID, just a laminated card with too little on it. His face was pleasant, polished, the kind you forget the second you look away. I understand you've had an interesting few days, he said calmly. Marley didn't answer. He walked the shop slowly, looking at tools, walls, even the ceiling. Places like this have layers, don't they? One story above ground, another underneath. She stayed behind the counter. Are you with the sheriff? I'm with a different office, he said. One that looks into unresolved histories. Her stomach tightened. I'd like to ask you to hand over any items you've found, he continued. Documents, photographs, tapes, especially tapes. And if I don't? She asked. His smile didn't falter. Then I'll have to come back with a warrant. But by then, someone else might get here first, and I can't promise they'll be as polite. He slid a white envelope across the counter. Inside was a business card with no name, just a phone number, and a sticker that said, Property of Defense Archives, Retrieval Division. He turned to leave. At the door he paused. This facility was shut down in 1958, he said. We don't keep records on programs that never existed, and people who ask too many questions about them usually stop asking. Oh, the door closed behind him. Marley locked it. Then she went to the workbench, pulled open the drawer, and stared at the 8mm film, the badge, the cassette. They wanted the story buried again, but she wasn't going to let it rot. She grabbed her phone, dialed Eli McGraw. I just had a visitor, she said. His voice was grim. Tall, brown coat? Yeah, don't give him anything, Eli said. They don't come unless they're worried. About what? About you finding something they missed. That night, Marley pulled a folding table into the shop bay, hooked up an old projector she'd found in the closet, and threaded the 8mm reel through it with shaking fingers. She closed the garage door, killed the lights, and pressed play. The film flickered to life on the back wall, grainy, silent. It showed Angela Wren, seated in the observation room. She was younger than Marley had expected, confident, composed. She looked into the camera and held up a clipboard. There were flashes of other people's subjects, walking through corridors, sitting in those chairs. Some wore hospital gowns. Some looked injured. One numbered 17 stared into the camera and didn't blink. The film shook for a moment, then cut abruptly. Next frame, Angela again, this time not composed, disheveled, crying. She held up a hand-lettered sign. Stop what you're doing. They are aware. The film ended in static. Marley sat frozen. Her heart thundered. This wasn't just unethical. It was dangerous. And now, it was awake again. The floor beneath her buzzed with that same low hum. Stronger now, like it wasn't just reacting, like it was calling. She gathered every document she'd found, snapped photos, backed up files, and loaded them into a metal lockbox. Then, she made 2 copies. One went into the safe she'd just bolted to the concrete. The other? Into the trunk of her backup car with a map taped to the lid. Because whatever had happened here, it didn't end in 1957. It had only been paused. And now, the shop wasn't just hers. It was theirs.